Okay. My name is Tom Hyland. Welcome, everyone. I've been writing about wine for 20 years. I write for winesearcher.com and Decanter, a little bit for Forbes. I'm an educator and photographer. And welcome to our webinar with Renée. Is it Ary or Ary?
Ary.
Ary, thank you. Okay, we hadn't met before. So who is what is the exact title? Is it the Director of Winemaking?
I'm the Vice President of Winemaking for
Vice
Napa Valley brands. Yeah, I'm the Duckhorn Vineyards winemaker.
Right. And that includes not only Duckhorn, but other brands like Golden Eye and Calera and things like that, correct?
I oversee our Napa brands, so that would include Paradox.
Paradox, okay. All right. First question for you is, how's the growing season coming along? How are the vineyards looking?
Yeah, it's today it's sunny. We've had a pretty dry growing season this year. It's been we probably had about a little less than half the average annual rainfall this year. So it's definitely been on the drier side. But ironically, just in the last 4 or 5 days, we've encountered some rain, and we actually had a little downpour the other day. So the vineyards got a little drink, but the sunshine is back out and things are looking good. We're starting to see some growth pop, and we're starting to see flowering across the valley. So things are looking good. Things are shaping up.
Well, you can use a good year every year, but I'm sure especially this year would be nice. So we're going to talk a lot about Merlot today, because obviously Duckhorn is as known for Merlot as any winery maybe in the whole country. So, and I did earlier this week, I did a webinar with Chapelet, and Cyril Chapelet was talking about that, and he brought up a little movie that you probably heard about.
I wonder what that could be.
Yeah, it begins with an S, and it's sideways. And now, but before we get into that, let's go back to the history. Now, the winery, we're looking at a little over 40 years now, aren't we?
Yeah, we actually, the 2017 vintage, which is some of the wines in the lineup today, which for the 17 is our 40th anniversary. So yeah, we were founded in 1976 by Dan and Margaret Duckhorn.
Were Dan and Margaret from the Napa Valley area, or were they from?
So they were from outside Napa. They came in really to lay the roots down and start their family here. Dan and Margaret had spent a lot of time in France. They spent a lot of time in Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, and just really became enamored with Merlot, I think, on their visits to France.
Okay.
And when they came to Napa, they had this kind of revolution that this was really the place to kind of lay down their roots and really to explore their love of Merlot a little bit more. And so they teamed up with the Upton brothers, John and Sloan, who owned the Three Palms Vineyard.
Three Palms, right.
Yeah, and Rick Foreman was working with them out there and growing some fruit out there. And so they kind of teamed up and started on their journey. So yeah, so they've been obviously around for a long time, and Dan and Margaret, when I started here in 2003, they were, their vision was alive and well, and it's been a cool journey. I've been here this will be my 18th harvest here, so for a while.
Yeah, I was reading that on the website that you started in 2003 as assistant winemaker, and then you took over in 2014 as full-time winemaker. So, just from my experiences out in California and other places in the world, in the wine regions, to be at one winery that long, I mean, it must be a great place to work. You must love it. You must love the people you're with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I always tell people that 17 years into it, it still feels the same when I come to work every day, which is really cool, because we're obviously growing and evolving as a business and as a winery, but it still feels like home. And there's a lot of people that have been working here for decades. The president of Duckhorn Wine Company has been here. It's his only job he's really ever held. He started here when he was 16, and he's still here. So it's pretty cool. It's a great place to work. And yeah, it's my home away from home. So.
And we were talking earlier. You're from New Jersey, you said?
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, grew up in New Jersey, lived there till I was 18. And then when I graduated high school, my dad got offered a job in California. And he was actually a California kid. He actually grew up in Chicago, and then moved to California with his parents, and then eventually moved to the East Coast. And I think he was done shoveling snow and doing East Coast winters, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
That can get a little tiring, right.
Yeah, they get a little tiring. And so he kind of jumped at this job opportunity. And for me, it came at a good time, because I was enrolling in colleges. And so I ended up looking at some schools in the North Bay out here in the East Bay area, and ended up at St. Mary's College over in Moraga.
Okay. And your your degree in enology or in viticulture was at Davis or Fresno State or?
So I got a degree in chemistry and art,
Chemistry.
both out of
Okay.
St. Mary's. Yep. And I've attended a ton of classes at Davis along the way. But yeah, my degree is in chemistry and art.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, what's the total production of Duckhorn these days?
Let's see. I make under my brand. I do 26 different wines. So we have our core wines, which a lot of you know about, our Napa Sauv Blanc, or Chardonnay, or Napa Merlot, and Napa Cab. So that kind of makes up the core production. There are larger wines that go out into the wholesale channels, and a mix of DTC as well. But then the other wines are mostly small SKUs, so anywhere from 200 cases up to about 3,000 cases. So on the smaller side.
Okay.
So probably a couple 100,000 putting all that together.
Okay, I have to go back 1 second here because Christina Francis on the chat box writes, "Go Gales." So I'm assuming
Nice.
she went to St. Mary's. So
Awesome. Very cool. Go Gales.
is that a Jesuit school, by the way?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I thought because I attended Loyola University in Chicago, so
Yeah. Nice.
another Jesuit school. So I'm sure everybody watching is fascinated by that. But
Yeah.
let's get back to
It's
so.
cool.
I'm sorry, you talked about different lots, and what was the total production again? How many cases?
We're just over 200,000.
200,000. So,
Mhm.
and I see that that first vintage was 1978, and you had 800 cases of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. So,
Correct. Yep. 800 cases of Three Palms Merlot, first release, and then Napa Cab. Yep.
that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
and we talked about Merlot. We're going to talk about that a lot today. You have, is it 6 or 7 Merlots now that you produce?
So I make 6 Merlots under my brand, under the Duckhorn Vineyards brand. And then we also have the Decoy Merlot in the portfolio. Yeah.
Okay.
So all very different, distinct, really show different style, different sense of place, different version of Merlot, and what's great about it.
And the first one was the Three Palms, correct? Or was it the Napa?
The first one was Three Palms, correct.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that vineyard. And because I've looked up, I wrote an article a little over 2 years ago at Forbes when your PR firm helped me out quite a bit with samples and things like that. And I talked to Alex Ryan, who's your CEO.
Sure.
And first of all, his quote about Merlot and why he loves it so much, he says, and I want to get your thoughts on this. He says, quote, "Merlot is a remarkable grape with a pleasure factor that is off the charts."
Very true. I would second that for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Anything else you want to add on Merlot? Just in general?
Merlot, I love the versatility of Merlot. Sure, we do standalone Merlots. You'll see in the lineup, we get into some 100% Merlots, but Merlot is also a great blender grape. It's got this amazing, fleshy, supple mid-palate that it makes it so versatile. And I love the food-friendly nature of Merlot. I think you can pair it with a lot of different foods, which is one of the things Dan and Margaret loved about it and kind of why they fell in love with it originally.
Right. And I noticed with all the Cabernets that you blend Merlot back into it. So
we do. Yep, we do. We do a lot of blending into our cabs as well. Yep.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Three Palms is the most famous Merlot that you make, and now you own the vineyard, correct? Duckhorn owns the vineyard, right?
We do. Yep. As in 2015.
2015, you purchased it.
The vineyard. Yeah.
And Alex Ryan says it's a valley floor vineyard, but when you drink it, you think it's on the mountainside. It's that intense. So
that's true. There's a lot of truth to that. It is by far our most age-worthy Merlot, but also can rival some of our really age-worthy structured Cabernets as well. And I think people are pleasantly surprised by it.
We got a picture of Three Palms there.
Yeah, picture of Three Palms right there.
I'd say that's a very appropriate name.
It's funny, people always ask, why do they call it Three Palms, and show them the picture. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's an incredible site. It's a unique site, and it's a lot of fun to work with. As a winemaker, it kind of takes everything you think about Merlot and throws it all out the window, because there's really no clay out there. It's super rocky. It's really well-drained, kind of deep soils, really rocky soils. And so that structure and that minerality from the soil really comes through in the wine and creates this beautiful complexity, but also age-worthy quality. And so it's a neat vineyard, and these vines are, they were planted in the early to mid 90s, and the roots go down deep. There's a lot of concentration, a lot of structure, a lot of complexity. And so it's a neat vineyard.
Okay. But you said the early to mid 90s. I mean, you made your first vintage in 78. So was everything
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, does it?
That's
Early
okay.
to mid 70s. Early to mid
Okay.
70s.
All right.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's 73 acres. It's just actually a few miles up the road here from Duckhorn Vineyards, from the visitor center, and it is valley floor. It's located on the southern tip of the Calistoga AVA,
okay.
and so it is a warm site, and there's a lot of volcanic stones out there as well that really kind of help radiate the heat. So, you know, when it's 95 here, it's a little over 100, 105 out there. So really being mindful of water, but the fact that these vines go down so deep, they're used to being stressed, and even through, you know, our drought years, they really didn't seem too fazed by it. They're just very well established, and so what that does is it creates a really nice consistent wine year in, year out. So
Okay.
also, being that it's Merlot and it's generally an earlier ripening varietal, I don't have to, you know, worry in cooler seasons about it not getting ripe. So it's actually some of my first reds that hit the winery during harvest. And I'll generally start in the Merlot blocks and move over to the Malbec, and then kind of go through the other Bordeaux blenders there. So it's nice for cooler years. There's generally no worry about it not kind of
Okay.
getting.
This is Malbec and other varieties that are in Three Palms also, or is it not just
So
Merlot?
yeah, it's 73 acres, and it's actually kind of divided up into a quadrant system. There's kind of 4 quadrants. There's 13 blocks in total, and we have all the Bordeaux varietals planted out there, red Bordeaux varietals. So about 50 out of the 73 acres is Merlot, and then the other piece is divided up between Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and just a little bit of Malbec.
Okay. And the current vintage is 2017, correct?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that vintage, because I know it was rather warm.
It was, you know, 17 was a vintage of extremes. I think, you know, we started out the winter season was just a really wet season. We had a ton of rain that year. And, but as we kind of moved into spring, it did dry out rather quickly, and it ended up being kind of a warm, dry spring, which did kind of trigger a timely bud break that year. So even though it was so wet in the winter, we did end up with a normal bud break season. And then we had, you know, we usually have a heat wave around Labor Day. That's pretty typical here in the Valley. That year it came a little bit early, and it was a scorcher. It was, I think, 7-8 days of 100 plus. It was just a really long heat wave. So what that did is it kind of kicked everything into full gear and really kind of sped up the harvest. So which was good, considering kind of how we ended that vintage and just the October fires that started and whatnot. So
Right.
we pretty much had everything picked off leading up into the early to mid October.
And
So.
was Merlot affected differently, or well, I guess in every year it would be, but in a hot year like that, how does Merlot get affected differently than Cabernet Sauvignon, for example?
Yeah, Merlot is definitely finicky when it comes to over a lot of heat and sun exposure. So we make sure our vineyards have quite a bit of flop going on in the trellising and the canopy. So we really like to leave a lot of that kind of overhanging growth there to provide a little extra shade barrier. That's pretty key for us in our Merlot vineyards, especially in the warmer sites. So. And then obviously looking at irrigation and whatnot, and kind of staying on top of that. So.
Okay. I know that when we talk about the discussion, when we discuss the discussion, that's the 2016, which is the current vintage, which is a phenomenal vintage from everything I've tasted in Napa. But we'll talk about that. But let's talk about the most recent vintages, which are not out yet, but 18 and 19. What were those growing seasons like in Napa?
So 18 we had kind of a bigger crop in 18, pretty even though. It was a really nice kind of even vintage. I'm trying to remember now. Getting into the 19, I think it was one of those years that we didn't have to worry a whole lot. It was kind of like you could walk through your blocks and shop them and pick them at your leisure. We weren't pressed by heat. We weren't kind of making snap decisions based on what the weather was doing. It was kind of temperate and even keeled, which is always kind of nice for a winemaker. You can cruise your blocks and pick at leisure, and you're not really forced by heat spikes and whatnot.
Good. Nice when that happens, isn't it? Yeah. Instead
It's
of running around
very
like,
nice when it
yeah.
happens. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
let's go to two questions here that just came in. One from my favorite anonymous attendee. Okay.
Okay.
And he or she says, where do you source the Merlot? I know you have many sites, but the follow-up question is, what's your favorite Merlot that you produce?
Favorite, it's interesting. We do 6 different Merlots, and I like them all for different reasons. So Carneros is our classic cool climate Merlot, and it's one of my favorite for pairing with a variety of different foods. It's got that really kind of bright, vibrant cherry, red plum notes to it, a lot of bright acid, and it's just got this really nice, even, silky tannin structure. So it seems to pair really well with different foods. It's Carneros AVA, so you've got that nice kind of San Pablo Bay climate. You've got the cooler, foggy mornings, and just a really long, cool growing season, which helps keep those acids a little bit brighter and really makes for it to kind of pop in your glass, which is nice. So that's definitely a favorite of mine, a go-to, kind of like an everyday. I seem to drink that a lot, just kind of no matter what I'm eating or drinking.
Okay.
And then let's see, our Napa Merlot, which is really made to focus on the diversity of the Napa Valley. It's a wine that we pull from a lot of different vineyards, estate and grower sourced throughout the valley. And the idea with that wine is to really kind of showcase all those great little pockets throughout Napa and what Merlot can do, but kind of bringing together. So bringing the cool climate, the warm climate, mountain and valley floor, and it's kind of blending those into this really kind of silky, supple, fleshy, approachable wine. It's meant to be an approachable wine.
Okay.
And then, take yourself up the mountain. We have a Howell Mountain vineyard called Stout Vineyard that is about 2,100 feet in elevation and has a lot of structure, a lot of kind of wild red fruit characters, a lot of savory notes. That one's a lot of fun. It's definitely a heartier wine. It's very age-worthy. It's something that you can lay down in your cellar. It's a fun one. And then, of course, Three Ponds.
How long have you been producing that Stout Vineyard?
Since 1989. So
okay.
We've been working, we have a Howell Mountain Cabernet that we do, and then also the Stout, yeah.
And are these all vineyards that Duckhorn owns, or are you purchasing from?
Correct, yes, Stout we own, yep.
Okay, all right. And I would imagine at that elevation of 2,100 feet, obviously the vineyard's well drained, but I imagine the yields must be rather small.
It depends. The Merlot yields can be a little bit bigger, probably a little over 4 tons per acre. The cab tends to be a little bit lower. It kind of depends on where you're at. There's a lot of different slope aspects on that vineyard, so it kind of depends, and also with the clone as well. But I'd say on average, 3.5 to 4.5 would probably be typically what you're looking at. Yeah.
And are these grapes harvested later than just at any other vineyard?
Yep, Stouts typically our last estate ranch that we bring in. Yep, they'd be late October.
Late October, okay, all right.
Yeah.
A second question comes from Suzanne Gabby. Suzanne, thank you. She said she just got emails on the release of your 40th anniversary Merlot, and she wants to know about it.
40th anniversary Merlot. So yes, you've seen the lineup. We have our little 40th anniversary showing. Oh, you see it with the light there?
Yeah, it washes it out. That's okay.
Tough to see it on there, but yeah, so the 2017 was our 40th anniversary, and so we have our little 40th logo on there, and so all of our Merlots in 17 are actually part of the 40th. Is she interested in talking about any one of those specifically, or? I
don't know. It just says emails on the release of the 40th anniversary Merlot, so.
Yeah, so it's our 17 vintage.
Okay.
We're excited to share all 6 of them with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about. First of all, before we get into the specific Merlots and Cabernets, I do a lot with Italian wines, and of course, with the European climate, the climate change has been something that's been discussed for a long time now, and I don't think of it as much with Napa especially Napa, because it just seems to be hot every year. And some years are hotter than others, but what sort of changes have you seen in the climate of the last, let's say, 10, 15 years?
We've definitely noticed changes. There's a lot more extremes now. We seem to be swinging far in one direction or the other. So, we were in quite a few drought years, and then that went straight into like just flood years. And it seems to be less in the middle and much more extremes here in the Valley. Still definitely warm overall, but the last cool vintage we've really had was 2011. It's been a while, but definitely more extremes.
Okay. What about 14? Because I enjoyed the wines from that vintage. They were a little bit lighter and more approachable. Was that?
14 was a little more, it was warm, but it was a little more even keeled and there was less spikes. There was less
Okay.
heat spikes. So it was like when you get into the 15 vintage, I think I remember counting over 22 heat events in the 15 vintage. It was just one after another. And it didn't really come down in the 15 vintage. So you'll see our 15 vintage wines are just pushing a lot more dark fruit. You can kind of see more of those riper tones coming through just as a function of the vintage.
Okay.
But,
Here's
yeah.
here's a wonderful question. I love this. This is from Sandy Kowalczyk, and she brings up a very, very wonderful moment in the history of Duckhorn when she says, "What was so unique about the 2014 Three Palms that you were honored with Wine of the Year?" Which is from the Wine Spectator, correct?
Yes, correct. That was one of those moments that I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It was the 14 vintage. I agree with you. It was one of the most incredible vintages I've experienced in my 20-year tenure. And 14 had a lot of like just poise and elegance, but it had complexity and it had layers. And it was just, it was a really beautiful vintage across the board. But it's interesting because I remember, for me, I tend to look at each vintage as kind of two pieces. I see the vineyard part and I see what's going on out there, and then, the winery part. And sometimes you see kind of different things and you kind of piece it together. And as they age and evolve, you see that come together a little bit. But I remember coming out of the 13 vintage. It was a very structured, complex, lot of structure in the 13 vintage. And I remember thinking the 14s were going to be a little light. And I remember being worried about that. And then as they kind of just started to develop in barrel, they just really came alive, and I got really excited about them. I remember having a moment down here in Shea 5, just getting really excited about the 14 vintage and about what they were going to show and how they were coming together. So I was excited about them. And obviously the Spectator honoring the Three Palms was, obviously about the wine, but also about like the Duckhorn story and Merlot and all that. So all
Right.
those pieces coming together, which was pretty awesome.
I can imagine, right? And
Yeah.
then a follow-up question on that from Suzanne Gabby again. She says, "How long can you lay down to 2014?"
The 14 will lay down, the Three Palms will easily lay down 15 plus years. You'd be surprised with Three Palms, it ages incredibly well. We did, a couple years ago for our 40th anniversary, we did a tasting with an old shareholder of ours, a friend of Dan Duckhorn's, that had called us up and just said, "Hey, I have this cellar that I've been collecting all these Duckhorn wines for all these years. What do you guys think about getting a little intimate tasting together? We'll, bring in Tom Rinaldi, the original winemaker, and some friends." And we tasted through almost every single vintage in those 40 years. And Three Palms always shows so well. It ages really, really well. It's got the complexity, the backbone and the structure and the density is there, but it's just, it really lays down well.
Great.
Yeah.
Sandy, who asked that question before about that award you got, was she said wants everybody to know that she's fortunate enough to have a 2014 3-liter in her cellar. So
Ooh, fun.
exactly, yeah.
Very
So
nice.
no
Must
need to
have been
rush.
for a
No
special
need to rush
moment.
into that. Exactly. So
Yeah.
and here's an interesting note from Daryl Serlin. Thank you, Daryl. He says, "Great job, Renee. We enjoyed hanging out with you in 2017 on a boat in France. Enjoying the 2016." Yeah, I'll mispronounce this probably. Patsimato?
Patzimaro, yeah, or
Patsimato
Patzimaro.
Cabernet as we watch this. Tony and Daryl Serlin. So
Nice. Yeah, that was an amazing trip. We did a wine club trip in France, and it was
great.
a neat experience.
What part of France?
We were in Châteauneuf-du-Pape and all over Hermitage, kind of Rhone area. We did a Rhone River cruise, and it started in Lyon and kind of made its way down the river. I took my husband with me, and it was really cool.
This was anything but Merlot, I guess, right? So
yeah.
okay.
Yep, branched out a little.
Yeah, well, why not? Yeah. Variety is the spice of life, the spice of wine. So you've been with the winery for, what is it, 15 years or so, or almost?
17 years,
okay.
Yeah. 17.
Now, I know you were assistant winemaker, so you weren't calling all the shots, but were there, with other, you were working with, was it with Mark Behringer? Was that the winemaker at the time?
When I started, Mark Behringer was the winemaker. And actually, just to correct you, when I started, I actually came on as a lab supervisor. So
okay,
I got brought on, I worked at Robert Mondavi before I came over here, and the idea was to kind of build up our quality control program. And at the time, we just had the 3 brands. It was Goldeneye, Paradox, which was still being made at Duckhorn. We didn't have the winery just yet. And then Duckhorn Vineyards. And so I came on to kind of help build out our quality control program.
Okay.
And then later moved more into an assistant winemaker role and into an associate role and kind of.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be corrected. Thanks.
Yeah.
Was there a particular, again, you Duckhorn, I say you, I mean, Dan and Margaret were really instrumental in focusing on Merlot at that time. Were there other Napa Valley Merlots from certain producers that Tom Rinaldi or Mark or you were looking at and saying, we want to make wine like this, or was that never a thought? Was it just, these are the grapes we work with, we want to make the best wine we can?
I think people are always taking inspiration from others. There's kind of no way around that, and there's certainly a lot of great Merlots out there. When I came on board, I remember being really excited because I worked with some Merlot at Robert Mondavi, but I really didn't dig into it at that point. I was excited to kind of learn the many nuances of Merlot and kind of get as excited about it as they were. And it happened quickly. It's funny because Dan and Margaret were incredibly involved at that time. Dan used to drop off grape samples in the lab for me, and I would crush them, and we'd kind of talk through things. And I'd go out to the vineyards with Mark and kind of learn about all the little details that I hadn't quite experienced yet. And it was really neat. But Tom certainly was a huge inspiration for Mark. I know that, and certainly for me. Tom's a friend, and he's an incredible winemaker.
Yeah.
An incredible Merlot winemaker.
Yeah. Just to go back to Carneros, I noticed more producers or more growers planting Merlot in Carneros. We think of Carneros as with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay because it's a very cool climate. And is it just the fact that it's a little bit cooler there, or is it a lot of clay soil? What are the specifics about Carneros? Why does Merlot work so well there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. The cooler climate, obviously, the finickiness of Merlot as a varietal and just its ability to not do well with heat stress and water stress makes Carneros a really good area for growing Merlot. And that kind of long, cool growing season keeps that kind of fleshy mid palate and adds to just that nice rounded tannin profile. It certainly produces a nice drinkable Merlot, I would say. And then, having the bay influence and the fog and whatnot, and the clay soils, of course. Merlot is always known to do well in clay soils, and Carneros is a good example of that. It's got that moisture retaining ability and just allows it to kind of not dry out so quickly.
Okay. Now you mentioned the Stout Vineyard on Howell Mountain, and then you also have an Atlas Peak release. So what's the difference on those two? They're both
so very different. So Atlas Peak is really a fun AVA to work with, and it's one of those AVAs that I remember when we started kind of getting into making that wine and had the idea to do kind of a small production from that AVA. We were doing a little bit of it was a Merlot wine, but we were blending a little bit of Cabernet into it. And I went out there and I got to just experience. It's such a remote AVA. It's very different. There's some similarities to Howell Mountain in the soil profiles out there, but it's still different. I think the remoteness of it adds some character. There's some wild nature to it. There's a lot of minerality that comes through in the soils. You get these really dark fruit profiles, which I like, but because it's cooler, you retain a lot of that acidity. And so you get this bright acidity profile coming through with the darker fruit, and it just makes it really intriguing. So,
is the vineyard there at Atlas Peak a little bit higher than Howell Mountain, or is it vice versa?
So Atlas Peak goes up to about 2,600 feet in elevation. I believe Howell Mountain's a bit more like 21. We have 3 different vineyards that we buy fruit from up there. They're all grower sourced, and they're around 2,200 to 2,300 feet in elevation. Okay. So a little bit higher.
All right. And then you have one of the Merlots that has received incredible review. All of them have received excellent reviews, but the Rector Creek, which is a vineyard, and that's a little bit north of Yountville on the Silverado Trail.
Yeah, so that's the vineyard that surrounds our Paradox winery right there in Yountville on the trail. It's on the west side of the trail, and it's a killer site. I share some of the blocks down there with our Paradox program, but all the Merlot goes to me. I have 3 different clones down there, and the Rector Creek's always got this really beautiful blue tones that come through. There's always this kind of violet aspect, a lot of minerality. There's a lot of rocky soils down there, and you get this really nice, cool afternoon breeze that kind of rolls through midday and just kind of helps keep the temperatures down. So it really adds to a nice kind of long, even growing season.
And is that on a hillside, or is it more valley floor? Or?
It's valley floor. Yeah, it's valley floor. Yep.
And how old are the vines there?
The vines there are about 17 to 20 years old, depending on the block.
Okay.
Yeah, good, well-drained soils. Yeah, and it creates a really elegant profile. It's one of our more elegant Merlots, but really layered and complex.
And then finally we come to the Napa Merlot. So is it a blend of every vineyard, or just a select few that change every year, the blend?
Yeah, so the Napa Merlot is really meant to be, it's meant to showcase the diversity of the Napa Valley. So it's meant to bring in the valley floor fruit, the mountain fruit, warm climate, cool climate. So really kind of all those great little pockets and sources that we use throughout the valley and create this, this nice kind of well-rounded blend. So it is a mix of estate and grower, and the main AVAs are, let's see, Carneros is a big one. We have Calistoga, mostly from our Three Palms vineyard, and just 1 or 2 others up valley, Yountville, Atlas Peak. So we kind of blend everything together to kind of make the best representation of Napa.
Okay, I was looking back at the article I wrote when I interviewed Alex, and he said that, and this is a testament to the work you do, but he said that you conduct 60 individual fermentations just to make 6 Merlots. That's correct?
This is true. This is very true. Yeah, the style here has always been to keep everything separate. So everything's hand-picked and comes in half-ton macro bins. Everything gets fermented and aged separately. And we don't blend until I'm about 6 weeks before bottling. So I really like to have the wines age and evolve on their own, and then decide how best to put them together. Okay. So in any given year, I'll have at least 60 individual Merlot ferments going, which is pretty crazy.
That will keep your attention, keep you focused.
I like details.
Yeah, I guess. So, yeah. Well, you do a great job with it. So, and percentage of new oak.
Percentage of new oak on the Napa Merlot?
On any of them.
Across the board.
Across the board. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the Napa Merlot is 40% new French oak. Our appellation tier, so that would be the Carneros and the Atlas Peak, are 50%. And then as you get up into Three Palms, it's 75%. Okay. And stout is also 75%. So yeah, so it ranges from 40 to 75, depending on the structure and density of the wine and what it can handle.
Okay, I just checked my email and I got a question here. So pardon me while I turn my head here, but okay. I'll read the question. But it's from Joe Dickinson, and he says, some wineries give picked grapes to sister/child wineries. Do any of the picked grapes from Duckhorn vineyards, such as Three Palms, go into any of the sister/child wineries of Duckhorn or others?
Sure. Yes, we do have some estate vineyards that we share. So I talked about the Rector Creek site there that's down by Paradox. So the Merlot blocks I take in my program in one of the cab blocks. The Zinfandel and the rest of the cab blocks down there, and some Viognier goes into our Paradox program. I also share some Petit Verdot up at Three Palms that goes into Paradox and Duckhorn. So we have a block there that we both utilize. And also our Cork Tree Vineyard, which is down kind of South Napa on the trail. We have some blocks down there that we share as well.
This is down at Yountville, Stag's Leap area? Or?
This is actually south of there. So it's just across from Luna Winery, if you know where that's at.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, if you head down the trail, it's on just across the street from Luna, up on the hill there.
Okay. And I have to ask, since you're such a Merlot specialist, but what are your favorite food pairings with Merlot?
Food pairings. Ooh, this is a good one. I'm a big duck fan. I love duck. I love, and I love.
Coincidentally, since you work at Duckhorn, you love duck, right? So.
I didn't even think about that, but yes, duck's probably one of my favorite pairings. Right. I'm also a big lamb fan. I eat a lot of lamb, steak. Merlot's, it's versatile, and it's, especially because we have 6 different types and they kind of have different, flavor profiles and nuances. I feel like you can always find one to pair with. But yeah, I'd say duck is probably my favorite pairing.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I have to ask that question. I brought it up earlier, but that S movie, that thing called Sideways, that came out in
Anyways, sure.
2004. I mean, were there obviously a lot of, a lot of joking about it, and it really killed some sales at certain wineries.
Mhm.
But what sort of changes did you see? Or what sort of changes to sales? Did you have to change your marketing? Did you have to change overall? Did Alex have to make some changes?
We really didn't. Sure. I mean, so that movie was in 2005, 2007. Obviously, the market took a dip, and everybody kind of took a little bit of a hit at that time. But we didn't. What we really saw is that, you know, we have always been true to Merlot, and we weren't just about to abandon ship over a movie. We felt pretty confident in Merlot, and what we did see happening throughout the valley was, though, a lot of well-respected growers and wineries were giving up these great spots, and we were able to kind of go through and grab those. So what it did was it actually opened a lot of doors for us
That's
to
great.
pick up some really nice fruit along the way. And so we've kind of always stuck with it, and our Merlot has kind of been notching up year to year. The sales are still do pretty well. So yeah, we're sticking by it.
Well, that's great. It's nice to see that. I love Sauvignon Blanc too, which is a nice segue to. I don't see any Sauvignon Blanc there, so I'll pull out a bottle here. This is 2018, and I absolutely love it. And one little story before I ask you about the wine, but this is about 12 years ago. I was in Miami doing a lecture on Italian wines, and the night before there was a dinner I was invited to, and there were about maybe 15, 20 different producers from Italy. And we went to a restaurant. They didn't want to drink Italian wine. They wanted to drink American wine.
Okay.
Probably California, but it didn't matter. And so I was in charge. They said, Tom, pick up, a white wine that you think the Italians will love. So I picked up two, and one was a Washington State Riesling. I won't mention the name of the winery, but that wasn't exactly a big hit with them. But the other wine was the Duckhorn Sauvignon Blanc, and it went over just amazingly well. They absolutely loved it. And I think probably because it's, it wasn't a big fat, buttery Chardonnay. It was more in their style, maybe not as high in acidity, but it was very elegant, very subdued wine, and they really, really loved it. So, which is what I love about it. I'm having a glass tonight. I'm going to have some chicken
Nice.
with pea pods, but tell us about the wine itself.
I love our Sauvignon Blanc. It's one of my favorite wines to drink and to make. I'm a big fan of making white wines. People always get surprised when they ask me, what's your favorite wine to make? I love the transparency of white wines because winemaking is all about timing windows. And I find that when you're making white wines, the window for making decisions is much narrower than red wines. So you have to react a lot quicker. And I like that. I like being present. I like being involved. I like smelling and tasting and all that. Our Sauvignon Blanc, we started making in 1982, and it's a fun wine. It's definitely more of a traditional style Sauvignon Blanc. We blend Semillon into our Sauvignon Blanc. And it really adds this beautiful kind of weight and viscosity to the blend that is just another dimension that you really don't see much of anymore. Most Sauvignon Blancs are 100% Sauv Blanc, and obviously are a range of styles, but I like to kind of ride the border between tropical and citrus. I want it to be bright and crisp and refreshing, but still have a little bit of weight to it from the Semillon component. So I think it makes it food friendly and really versatile when you're pairing. And it's just kind of got this nice roundness to it that I like.
Yeah, I would agree. And it really does work with a lot of different foods.
Mm-hmm.
And it says Sauvignon Blanc without announcing it. I mean, some Sauvignon Blancs can be so kind of grassy and
racy. Yeah.
And racy would be a great word. So, but yours is very, very elegant. So, and how much of that do you make?
Let's see, we do about 75,000 cases of that one.
Okay, that's quite a bit. Okay, I love it, and I don't think I'll finish it tonight, but I'll save some for tomorrow as well. So let's move on to Cabernet Sauvignon.
Okay.
And you have, I count 5 different Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignons here.
I'm going to have to go through them. Yeah. So we have our Napa Cab, we have our Howell Mountain, Rector Creek, Monitor Ledge, Pot-Cimarron. So that would be 5. Oh, and the Rutherford. So we have 6 of them.
6, okay.
And then the discussion's a blend. We can talk about that one later.
Right.
So we've been doing Cabernets as long as we've been doing Merlot. So since our first vintage in 1978. And the Napa Cab is one of my all-time favorites. I really strive to make that a classic Cabernet. Something, again, I hate to keep going back to food friendly, but something that's just not over the top, nothing too heavy handed, really more of a classic style. And the idea, again, is with the Napa tier is to highlight the diversity of the Napa Valley and find all those little great spots that you can grow great Cabernet and kind of blend those together into one beautiful wine.
Okay.
So it gets 16 months in barrel and 50% new French oak. And our top AVAs for that wine are Rutherford, Yountville, Oakville, a little bit of Howe Mountain, and then Calistoga. Those are the main areas that we source from.
So it sounds, I would imagine Calistoga is a little bit riper, and is it more tannic also?
It depends on kind of where you're at in Calistoga. A lot of our Calistoga fruit is from the Three Palms Vineyard. So
Okay.
it's going to be a warm site with that in some nice structure and density and complexity. We have 3 other vineyards up there, definitely warmer sites for the most part. They get the morning fog, but then it warms up pretty well during the day.
Okay. And the Monitor Ledge, tell us a little bit about that Cabernet.
Monitor Ledge is my aha wine. It's one of my absolute favorites in our portfolio, and I think it's a wine that surprises people. So the vineyard is actually not that far south from Three Palms on the trail, so it's valley floor, and they have really well drained deep soils. There's a rocky kind of sub layer out there that really allows for good drainage, and the Cabernets out there are they're just voluptuous and they're fruit forward, but they also have just a lot of like spice and complexity to them. And I think it's one of those wines that you don't think will age well, but it ages incredibly well. And I like surprising people with it, pulling out a really old vintage of Monitor Ledge and pouring it for someone. And they're always surprised at how well it's holding up.
How old is it? How far do you go back? Excuse me. How many vintages in that Richter Creek?
Oh, we've been making that one for a while. What is our first vintage? I want to say 01 or maybe 98 now that I think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say towards the end of Tom's years going into Mark Behringer's years.
And what's the typical, it's different for different people when they say peak drinking, but when you think of peak drinking for a wine, let's contrast the Napa.
Okay.
Like the Howell Mountain or the Richter Creek.
Yeah, so Napa's going to be, 5 to 8, 10 years.
Okay.
Howell Mountain's definitely going to push that envelope out much further. That one, throw in your cellar and you can pull it out in 20, 25 years and you'll be really happy. Monitor Ledge is kind of in between those two, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about now the discussion, which is the current release is 2016, correct?
Correct.
And all the winemakers I've talked to, you mentioned 2013 before, how beautifully structured it was, and people were just saying it was just incredible vintage. And this is the best I've had since 13. So talk about the 16 vintage, how that went, that growing season.
Nice. Yeah, I love the 16 vintage. The 16 vintage to me just has a lot of like poise and elegance. They really shaped up to be these really beautiful wines. So the idea with this wine, we started making it in 2006, and the idea was to we focus on varietal wines, and so we really kind of wanted to go back to a blend and pay homage to the blend. So the name, the discussion, it gets its name from a discussion that Tom Rinaldi had with Dan and Margaret kind of in the early years. They were sitting around a kitchen table before they had their first release, and they were deciding on what direction to go, whether they were going to focus on varietal wines or do blends.
Okay.
And from what I gathered, this was actually a fairly heated conversation. I think it was more of an argument. And Tom really wanted to do blends and Dan wanted to go the varietal route. And of course, Dan won. So, but this is kind of paying homage to that discussion that happened and just to pay homage to the art of the blend.
I would say it's a good thing. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's a good thing that he won, because you wouldn't want to have a wine calling argument, would you?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I love telling that story because from what I gather, it was definitely heated. So
okay,
it's kind of funny. So, so it's 100% estate. It's the only black label in our lineup, in the Duckhorn Vineyards lineup. And yeah, there it is. And this wine is all about showcasing the art of the blend and really creating layers and complexity And it's not meant to be the biggest wine in our lineup. It's meant to have a degree of elegance and finesse to it. So we do something kind of fun with this one. It's a 24-month aging regime, and for the first 18 months we go into 100% new French oak, and we let the lots evolve on their own. And then after 18 months, we pull everything out, we make the blend, and we go back into 100% neutral barrels for the last 6 months.
Okay.
So this is really where I think the magic kind of happens on this wine. It's everything, it's blended at that point, so it really starts to kind of meld together. But also, it's just it kind of creates this really beautiful creamy profile in the palate, and just kind of everything just seems to come together at that point. So I like making this wine. It's a lot of fun, and it's really represents our best estate blocks and estate vineyards.
And what was the first production of that wine?
2006.
2006.
2006, yeah.
And what's sort of the aging potential on that wine? Let's talk about the 16, since that's the current release.
Yeah, I think the 16, I'd say 12 years for the 16 would be ideal.
Okay. Here's a note from Kim Denton, and Kim says, discussion is my favorite wine of all. We met Renee in 2017 at the release party. Being from Kentucky, that is the best derby party ever. There you go. So, and Christina Francis says going to miss the discussion release party. So, but was it just released this year, the 16th?
So we we started doing our release, syncing it up with the Kentucky Derby every year. So it happens in May, and of course this year it got pushed back, but they moved it to. Let's see, it is.
Kentucky Derby is going to be in September.
It's going to be in September, exactly. I want to say like close to Labor Day weekend. So we actually are doing
Labor Day weekend, right? That Saturday the 5th.
Yeah, and so this year we're gonna sync it up. So we move the party, just so you know, for those interested that can make it out to Napa and join us for the Derby party. Please do. We're still doing it this year.
Great. You want to talk about the other wines that you make as well? You said Paradox you make, and.
So Paradox, so I oversee the winemaking, but we have an amazing winemaker, Cardiff Scott Robinson, who joined us about 6 years ago. He was an assistant winemaker and then moved into a head winemaker role just last November. And I've worked with Cardiff for a while. He's fantastic. And yeah, so he takes the reins on the Paradox wines. And so different style there. They're all blends. So they take the kind of iconic great wines of the world and they kind of put their own twist on them. So everything they do it's a blending house, a little more contemporary style of winemaking. Okay.
I'm curious too. I'm sure you have a wonderful team of agronomists. And do you spend much time in the vineyards yourself, or are you really just so busy in the cellar that?
I do, yeah. I do get out to the vineyards. I have an amazing team. I have Rob Sorensen as my director of estate viticulture. So him and his team kind of monitor our estate vineyards and do all that. And then I have a grower relations manager, Cindy Johnson, who does all my grower liaising. But the three of us team up, obviously, and I make all the picking decisions, and I'm out in the vineyards, the start of every day during harvest, and then, throughout the growing season. So this time of the year is obviously scouting vineyards. They're working on their first rounds of estimates right now. And if we're picking up any sort of new sourcing, you're kind of going out and scouting those sites with Cindy and the team.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. There's another question that just came in. This is from Joe Dickinson. And Joe says, on the Duckhorn Cabernet Sauvignon Howell Mountain wine, which goes fast and there's never enough of it, how much is produced each vintage, and did the fires affect the harvest for this wine?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we make about 2,000 cases of the Howell Mountain Cab, and it's one that we've been doing since 1989. It's been around for a long time, and it's one of my favorite. I'm sure he knows Howell Mountain is such a unique AVA. It's small, but it's just got so much to offer. They're really just distinct wines, and it's definitely one of my favorites. So that in the 17 vintage, we had I think there were only 2 blocks left up there that hadn't been picked by the time that the fire started. So we were pretty lucky to be able to get everything in pretty much before then. So yeah, and it's ironic because we were all bummed when this heat wave started, and it was such a long heat wave in late August. It happened early and it was a lengthy one, but the blessing of that was that it kicked harvest into full gear, and we really kind of got picking earlier and moved a lot faster. So it ended up kind of helping us out.
Interesting. Okay.
When the fires came around. Yeah.
Right. We have a few more minutes left, about 5 or 6, but two more questions. One was I wrote an article which I'm trying to find, but I wrote this last year at Forbes, and I said, can Merlot ever be taken as seriously as Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley? And I guess in one way you'd have to say no, because Cabernet Sauvignon is always going to be the king, so to speak. But what is your take on that?
One of my favorite things to do is, pouring wines at a tasting or somewhere, and people come up and they tell me, oh, I really don't like Merlot. It's flabby, it's this, it's that. And, I'll pour them a wine and pass it to them. Sometimes it's three palms, something with a little bit more backbone to it. And they automatically assume it's a Cabernet. And so it's
really okay.
And they're incredibly surprised and delighted. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, maybe I should give it a chance. And so it's unfortunately that there's those preconceived notions about it. I think there are definitely some great Merlots out there that can stand up to any cab out there. But it's tough because we've gotten in the last few years that they're replanting their Merlot vineyards, and they're putting in Cabernet. And this valley wasn't meant to be a monoculture. There's so much diversity here in climates and soils. It really wasn't meant to be kind of all the same varietals. So luckily we have a good estate program, and we have a lot of long tenured growers that we work with that believe in us, and we believe in Merlot. And so we stick together. But yeah,
as a writer, that's a great quote. I'm going to have to remember that Napa Valley wasn't meant to be a monoculture.
Yeah, it really wasn't. Yeah.
I don't think any region is, but that's great. And I noticed the same. I wrote an article about Sauvignon Blanc in Napa, and and it was the same story there. There were just more, growers taking Sauvignon Blanc out because they can't sell Sauvignon Blanc for the same money they can sell Cabernet Sauvignon.
Sure. Ironically, you can hang your Sauvignon Blanc much heavier at almost twice the yield that you can with Cabernet. So if it actually did some of those dollars,
really?
It actually nets out to be pretty close. But yes, and now you're really ending up in that place where we were when Pinot took off after Sideways, is that we're ending up with cab vineyards where they shouldn't be, and so that's not good. I think there's already some regret happening. I can see some shifts even before COVID started and whatnot. People are starting to think maybe that wasn't the best idea. There's too much cab out there, and people aren't able to sell all of it. So
interesting. Yeah.
Sure.
One last question, and it's just more of a general question, not so much about Duckhorn, but just your take on what's the mood out there in Napa today. I know obviously I've talked to some producers, and they said it's very eerie and very quiet without the traffic, without tourists. But this is a valley that is based on tourism, on the restaurants, on so many things. So what's the people you work with and your colleagues, what's the thought process these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed a big change even in the last about week and a half. I live about 40 minutes from here, and I've noticed that there's not traffic, but there's flow on the road again. Like, you're not the only one out there. There's plenty of people on the road, and everyone's kind of saying that all over the valley. There's also a lot more restaurants that have kind of gotten into their groove, and they're doing pickup and takeout, and
right.
And they're evolving and kind of adapting as we go. And so it's nice, and everybody's got this great attitude of they're just excited to come in and see a friendly face, and you're picking up food and whatnot, and kind of supporting each other. So I feel like things are starting to turn a little bit. Everybody's not quite on full lockdown like we were. And it's nice to see. And of course the sun's out today, so I think that makes everything a little bit better. Everybody feels better with a little vitamin D in them.
Yes, yeah, I can attest for that in Chicago. So to get the sun out after all the rain we've had. So
yep.
Every state is, just to follow up, every state is different, of course. So I won't bother people with what's going on in Illinois. But so what is the current status in California?
So California is still, we're in full social distancing.
Right.
Masks are required, indoor areas. Napa's kind of been doing things a little bit behind Sonoma and some of the other surrounding counties, but we do have to wear masks when we're inside and not able to social distance and whatnot. And so we'll see. There's stages. Basically, there's stages to kind of reopening, but I'm not sure everybody's completely clear on the stages at the moment. It's kind of changing on a daily basis.
Right,
so I've heard that they're allowing restaurants to kind of start opening, but and actually have people come in and sit down. But the criteria and the guidelines that they have established right now makes it really difficult, just because you can't have people, close together, and you have to wear masks, and people are really, I have a couple friends that own restaurants, and they were thinking it's not quite worth it yet, just because of the business that they're going to get from doing that, and the people that they have to bring in. So I think it's going to be a little bit longer before we get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, how about Chicago?
The word stages is being used here too, and it's our governor. I won't get into politics here, but he's being very cautious on this. So, and there's quite a bit of protest. There's some countersuits that are being filed to get, because Wisconsin, just to our north, the local Supreme Court there in Wisconsin overturned the governor's orders, so everything's open now.
Gotcha.
And there are people just, they showed some of the restaurants and bars last night, and there's no social distancing at all. So that's not going to happen here. But it doesn't look like it. But I do need a haircut soon. So hopefully within a month. So, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, enough of that. But Renee, thanks. We're running out of time here. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Appreciate it. And thanks everybody that tuned in today. I appreciate a lot of good questions and comments. So.
Absolutely.
So fingers crossed for a great growing season for 2020.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Good luck out there.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.